at 7. Just want to give a little time for those that are joining us promptly at 7.
All right, give me 2 seconds. Good evening.
Sure. Thank you for those that are just joining us. We appreciate your time. We're going to just wait maybe 1 more minute here to allow others to log in before we get started. So thank you so much for your patience.
Sounds like we're having an audio issue. Potentially. Did anyone else catch that? Oh.
I don't think so. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you, Dave.
Okay. Thanks again for those that have joined us. We're going to wait maybe 1 more minute here just to make sure that everyone has a chance to log on, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
And sort out any of our technical issues.
Julia, I'm going to wait for your thumbs up to get started.
Okay, if no one else is having an audio issue, then I think we're okay to start.
Sounds good. Let's go ahead and get started then. Hi all, my name is Dave Javid with Plan to Place, part of the Good City Consultant team. And we're here tonight to talk about the objective design and development standards for new residential development as they're being developed for the city of Brisbane. And we're really excited to be here with you tonight. And we have a full agenda planned, hoping to get some Q&A going and hoping for as more participants join us here tonight. But before we get started, I wanted to hand it over to Mayor Cunningham for a welcome.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here. You know, there are so many things going on in our state and in our community relative to housing and development and what we're doing moving forward. So if you're participating in this, I am so grateful, and I'm sure the entire City Council and staff are really grateful that we've got this many participants who, you know, are really involved in wanting to make sure that we've got this proactive approach to what's going on in our city moving forward. You know, housing issue is a statewide and local concern, and we have to be very cognizant of that fact. The state keeps making it harder and harder and harder, and I'm going to say, and harder for the cities to maintain local control over the housing development projects. So this is so incredibly important to us that we get this right, and that you're involved, and that we're not just thinking about what I want for the city, but you know, in your responses even this evening, you know, what you think is appropriate for the entire city, for our single athletic young people who can walk half a mile to a train station, for our elders, for our families that have got maybe a single parent and 4 little kids who are trying to do groceries and take the bus and the train. We need to be thinking about all of these things relative to the designing of the homes that we're building for the future, not for us, but for the future. The city needs to proactively, and I really mean proactively, adopt clear community-based development standards for all residential projects, whether it's a single family home, a multi-family home, multi-unit dwellings, or whatever it is. So if you can be as open-minded as possible in this whole situation tonight and for the next few workshops, that would be amazing. This effort will ensure that the community retains say over the design of our projects. If we don't come up with the designs and we don't have them on the table for the state, then moving forward, the developers will come in and they will just be giving carte blanche to what they want, not what we want. So thanks again for joining tonight and contributing. It's so important. And with that, thank you for having me for a few minutes of your evening. And now I'm going to hand it off to John Sawicki. John, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Cunningham. Appreciate
right.
the welcome.
And I'll say good evening and sign off from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Cunningham. Again, staff does echo the mayor's sort of thanks for all of you who are participating this evening. You know, these kind of efforts really rely on you. We're really dependent on the community, and your input is incredibly invaluable to us as we go through these kind of programs. So I want to thank you for being here tonight. And with that, I want to kind of just briefly introduce the team who's working on this, the city and our staff and our consultant team, and then I'll turn it right over and we'll get this moving along. Again, I'm John Sawicki, the planning director. Julia Ayers, the senior planner, is managing this project on a day-to-day basis. Primary consultant is Good City Company, team of Aaron Ackman, Kavitha Kumar, and Nick Hamilton. And Place to Place, who are kind of primarily facilitating the meeting this evening and did a lot of the great public outreach we've done and will continue to do, Dave Javid and Paul Kronzer. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dave. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you, Mayor. Great introduction. So as we mentioned, the most important part of tonight's meeting is to hear from you all, and we've developed many different ways for you to get involved. Obviously, through this webinar is one. This is also being live streamed through your local channel, channel 27. It's also through YouTube Live. So many different ways that folks are hopefully dialing in. But if you do want to get involved during the Q&A session, we recommend that you follow this link on the screen so that you can be part of the Q&A live as it's happening. And we'll get to that point, and I'll talk a little bit more about how that's going to work, mainly through Q&A, but there's also different functionality through raise hands if you want to verbalize your comments. If for some reason you can't log on and you had questions, there's also information here on the screen where you can either text and or email in your questions, and we'll field them that way and make sure that they're referenced during the end of the meeting. So on the next slide, I just really quickly wanted to highlight how we're going to facilitate the discussion. So we do have the raise hand feature available at the bottom of your screen. You should have a little hand. It might also be in your participant window. If you use that raise hand, it'll pop up on the screen to let us know that you have a comment. And we're going to hold comments toward the end of the discussion once you've had a chance to hear the entire presentation. But that'll be a chance for you to verbalize your comments that way. If you're calling in, you could simply dial *9 on your phone. That will also have the same effect. And then there's also the Q&A function that you should see at the bottom of your video feed as well, where you can actually be fielding or sending us comments or questions throughout the meeting that then we'll address towards the end of the meeting as well. So we're trying to provide you with many different options to contribute. And again, it's really important that we hear from you tonight. So thank you so much for your time. And I'm glad to see that we have more participants joining as we've been moving through this meeting here. So if we go to the next slide, I just want to give you a quick overview of the agenda tonight. As I mentioned, we're going to definitely want to give you a background of the project, an understanding of the analysis that's been done to date, some of the outreach that's been done through surveys and other formats, and kind of the input that we've received to date, and other engagement that we're planning to do. We want to definitely talk about the project schedule and kind of the key milestones along the way. And then most importantly, again, is those Q&As, the comments and questions that we'll take from you all, both through the Q&A function and during the verbal comments and other functionality at the end of the meeting. So what we're going to do first, though, as a kind of a fun way to get started and start the interactive process, is to launch a live poll. So with that, I'm going to launch a poll now. And these are just general questions related to where you live, just to kind of get a sense of where folks are coming from, what type of home you live in, as well as just some simple demographic questions. So you should see the poll pop up on your screen now. If you could please take a minute here and run through these questions and give us your responses, and then I'll end the poll and share those results back out with everyone so you all can see it. So again, the questions are, what's your relationship to Brisbane? Really kind of getting a sense of whether you live or work here, what type of home you live in your current home, if either you rent, you live, really kind of honing in, obviously this being a housing type meeting, and then how long you've lived in Brisbane, as well as your age. So I see we're getting some votes coming in here now, which is great. Thank you so much. I might wait just 15 more seconds here to give everyone an opportunity to contribute, and then we'll end the poll and report out. And if you didn't get a chance to answer, not a problem at all. This is just really meant to be a quick kind of snapshot of who's joining us here tonight. So I might wait just 10 more seconds. I see one or two more coming in. Okay, let's take a quick look at the results now. All right, so as you can see, at least those that took the poll, everyone lives in Brisbane, which as expected. What type of home you live in, a mix between single family and condominiums. All here primarily homeowners, a mix of ages, as well as how long you've lived in Brisbane. Half of you that submitted your response have lived here more than 21 years. So great to see. Oh, and you all, just want to make sure, oh, there we go. Sorry about that. There was a little delay in the sharing. Could you all see the results now? Great. Sorry, I had meant to share it with you before. There's a little glitch in it. So that you all can see the results now on the screen. And I'll ask Paul to take a couple quick snapshots. Thank you, Paul. Great. So with that, we are now going to move into the presentation. And again, if you have any questions or comments that come up, please go ahead and use that Q&A function. I will definitely address those toward the end, and then we could also take some verbal comments at that point as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the results and hand it over to Aaron.
Thanks, Dave. My name is Aaron Ackman. I am a principal with Good City Company. We're a Peninsula-based local government consultant firm, and really excited to work on this project. So in terms of the presentation and project tonight, we're going to go over the project background, why we're here tonight, what the goals overall are. I think the mayor gave a great brief overview of what some of the goals are, but it's really to, although state-placed limitations, to put as much control as possible locally. What community and outreach and engagement we have planned. Of course, tonight is a big first step in the community outreach and engagement, but there's a lot more planned. Then, of course, the overall project schedule for the next year. Next slide. So why are we here? The mayor did point this out, but increasingly over the last 3-4 years, the state has limited the amount of control that local agencies, cities have over the housing review process. And really there's two bills that this comes down to. There's Senate Bill 35, and there's the Housing Accountability Act. And I won't go into the details of each of these. We do have these up on the city's website at brisbaneca.org/SB2, and we'll mention that website again. But in essence, what these bills both do, just for the backdrop, Senate Bill 35 has been around for about 4 years, but has been strengthened over the last 4 years. And the Housing Accountability Act was adopted in 1982, but it really has been strengthened over the last few years as well. And in essence, what these bills do, now is say that cities, you no longer can just place subjective standards, and we'll get more on to what that means, but you need to create objective criteria that can be quantified to say whether or not a housing development will be approved. And if you have these objective standards within your plan, a plan really has to be what you're planning to do, and you have to implement it that way. The problem lies in the fact is that many cities, not just Brisbane, almost virtually all cities throughout California have subjective standards within their code that could be interpreted by different people in different ways. And because of that, and the way the state law is written now, those subjective standards are thrown out and cities can no longer rely on them. Next slide, please. So what are the project goals? Of course, the first goal is to really engage the community. This plan, this code is going to be in effect for over the next decade or two, and really is going to create the look of the housing that is developed within Brisbane. To the second point, and perhaps most importantly, that despite these state laws, to really maximize local discretion and create a vision for Brisbane through these codes that developers, a vision and expectation for development through these codes that housing developers will have to meet. We have to understand what the current constraints are, and odds equals objective design and development standards. So if you see that acronym there, that's what it's standing for. And then amend the zoning ordinance to create objective standards within the code. Next slide, please. So really three key questions that it comes down to are, what are the difference between subjective standards and objective standards? What are some examples of objective design and development standards? What happens if Brisbane or any other city decides not to adopt these? Next slide. So let's start with subjective standards. Now, these are taken from the Brisbane Municipal Code, and these are for any type of housing development that needs to go through a design review process. And that really falls down into two buckets. That falls down into multifamily / mixed use housing development, as well as single family home development on the ridgeline. So as you can see within these subjective standard examples, the proposals scale, form, and proportion are harmonious, and the materials and colors complement each other. The second finding says the features must integrate well and maintain a compatible relationship to adjacent development. Now, why are these subjective? You could have two residents, you could have two staff members, you could have two people sitting on the planning commission or city council who really interpret what the word harmonious means differently or what complement means differently. And there's no way for both a developer who's proposing new housing as well as a community member to have concrete expectations of what the city's design standards are. So the state says you can know, even if these are located within your code, you can no longer apply these to housing developments that are proposed. Next slide, please. So objective standard examples. Now, these are also from Brisbane Code. This is within the Parkside Precise Plan. And these are great examples of how you set forth the community expectation. So the first one says, third story shall be set back at least 5 feet from the wall plane to the second and first stories below. So everyone knows what a first story is, second story is, and what 5 feet is. That's measurable, it's objective. Second standard, at least 50% of the planes of the exterior walls along public streets shall vary in depth or direction using cornices, recesses, bay windows, and overhangs. So once again, 50% is a quantifiable number, and those architectural features have true definitions that you could apply to developments. Next slide. So what happens? We've hinted at this some, but really what happens is you have two types of standards within your code. You have objective standards and you have subjective standards. The problem right now is those subjective standards, no matter what city you're in, whether you're in Brisbane or Los Angeles, no longer apply to development. So they're thrown out from the code. So all you can rely on to set the standards for your development, to set the standards or set the expectations for future developments are the objective standards within your code. So really at this point, most cities have minimal local discretion because there's not a lot of objective standards. So that's what we're trying to get in front of. We're trying to set the standards for future developments. Next slide, please. So we did a visual preference survey. This is closed now, but it ran for about a month and a half. And we wanted to take a snapshot of the community and get feedback about what the different design features and what people feel about different design features that are applied to different types of development. So building setbacks, building height, location and configuration of parking. You can see the list here on the screen. And I'll go a little bit more into definitions and social visuals of what those design features mean. Next slide. So setbacks and stepbacks, perhaps the most used terms within planning. Setbacks are exactly what they say. They're how far a building is set back from the street. Those can vary in cities from you have to be right up to the front of the sidewalk to the property line. Many cities have further, a lot farther setbacks, 20, 25 feet from the property line. And you can see this described here within these illustrations. A second term is step back, and that really refers to how far you step back upper stories from the bottom stories. So sometimes cities have step backs that start at the third story, sometimes at the second story, sometimes further up, but they're generally another design feature that helps mitigate how bulky a building looks from the street. Next slide, please. So building height. Now this is very unique within Brisbane, and if there's questions, I'll probably punt to Brisbane staff to explain this. But because Brisbane is a hilly community and there's a lot of building slopes within town, there is building height is measured either to the middle of the roof slope or the if it's a flat roof, right where the flat roof starts, and then somewhere within 3 and 5 feet of where the slope. So what it does is it takes into consideration what the hill is like, and to really also mitigate the overall bulkiness of a building when it's on a hillside. Next slide, please. Landscape screening. Now this shows landscape screening in a single family home or kind of a lower rise community. But landscape screening and the way you use trees, the way you use landscape can really soften the look of a building, both from the adjacent neighbors, but also from the street view. So this is a great planning tool for when you do have buildings that happen to be larger, multifamily buildings, you have the ability to soften the look of those through landscaping. Next slide, please. So you hear the word articulation and architectural design features thrown a lot, both in architecture as well as in planning. If you see the building on the top left here, now what articulation means really is what are the 3D, what are the three-dimensional components of the building? I think we all saw a lot of buildings that were built in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that were really blocky buildings that went up and they looked like boxes and they didn't have a lot of articulation. So if you look at this building, some things you could see is the awnings on the lower level. Those are an example of horizontal articulation. The way that there's setbacks in the balconies there, and there's decks out there. There's different roof eaves and different roof pitches that help break up the building. And those are examples of articulation in architectural design features. And you can see some that are applied to single family homes, some of the ways, different ways that windows are used, that dormers are used, that roof pitches are used to help break up and add interest to a building. Next slide, please. So what did people say that responded to this? We got pretty good participation. And even though this survey was a point in time and we had it open for 6 weeks, we would continue to encourage the public to give us their feedback, both tonight, and if you happen to be watching a recording of this video, feel free to email Brisbane staff, and all of your comments will be taken into consideration and reported back to the Planning Commission, reported back to the City Council as they decide the right design features. So in mixed use housing developments, we showed these two developments here. What some survey respondents said, they wanted to see more articulation, more landscaping. They thought it was too monotonous from a color standpoint, wanted to see more colorful exterior. This is something pretty common too, the fourth bullet point. Places to sit outdoors. Not only do those create some architectural interest in the sidewalk area, but they're also practical when you have walkable areas, a place for people to sit. And then second and third stories set back from the ground floor below with balconies or similar outdoor space. And balconies are great because not only do they provide architectural interest, but they also put eyes on the street, which is another strong planning concept. Next slide, please. Now we looked at townhome developments. And as you can see, there's a common theme in a lot of these that people wanted to see more building articulation. They thought the designs were a little bit too, they use the word boring overall, wanted to see more landscaping built in, varying the roof pitches, and second and third floor set back from the ground floor with balconies or similar outdoor space below. Now, what I will say, all of these comments are good, but what we have to do, and what the state will be watching us on all of these is the cumulative impact of all these different design features. So while we want to make the best looking buildings possible and set the expectations, we also have to be conscious of the fact that if you add too many, let's say you require the second and third stories to be set back 30 feet from the first floor, you might make a building infeasible to build. So those are other design aspects that we have to pay attention to during this process. Next slide, please. So mid-rise, multifamily. People wanted to see different roof lines, more porches and patios, more landscaping, more colorful exterior, and also second and third stories that are set back in similar outdoor space. Next slide. And finally, high-rise multifamily. Now, when we use the term high-rise here, just in case there's folks that are into building, we're not meaning true high-rise that they're greater than 75 feet or more that you would see in San Francisco, but buildings that are larger than 3 or 4 stories. So 5-story max, that would usually be a building that's somewhere between 50 and 65, 70 feet. And a lot of times as buildings get larger, these architectural components become more and more important because buildings are just more visible and you need to do more to reduce the overall perceived mass. So once again, you could see all these comments, but very similar to the comments that we saw on the previous building types. Next. So single family homes on Ridgeline, there's not a whole lot of lots that are like this within Brisbane. I believe there's less than a dozen left that are left to be developed. But for everyone's home who's developing here and everyone who's a neighbor, they're just as important. So once again, more landscaping, more colorful exterior, low profile structures and varied roof lines. And of course, less bulky, and they wanted more exciting exterior designs. Next slide. So in terms of the outreach period, we started this back in August. The project understanding, we were getting up to speed, working with city staff. We had some outreach to people who own property within Brisbane, people who build affordable housing within Brisbane. We're now we're in the second phase of public outreach. We had a planning commission meeting in the February timeframe. Of course, we would love to be doing these meetings in public. We had to hold this first one virtually. We're hoping, we have 3 community workshops planned. We're hopeful that the last community workshop at least can be done in person sometime during the summertime. We'll have the second workshop in the May, early June timeframe. We'll post that on their website. And of course, this will go to the Planning Commission as well as the City Council in the October to February timeframe, where will ultimately be adopted in the early portion of next year. Next slide. So with that, I will turn it back over to Dave as we go into the questions and comments section of our presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Aaron. So yeah, as we mentioned throughout, and as Aaron mentioned, the most important part of this discussion is to hear from you all, and this isn't necessarily the only opportunity. We'll be fielding questions over the next couple of weeks to insert into the summary for this meeting. But if we can go to the next slide real quick, just as a reminder, the way that we're hoping to do this is either through the hand raise function that I'm sure you all have been on Zoom so much, you're all experts at, and or you could use the Q&A function and send us questions that way. And then hopefully we have some time for a discussion here. So I see about 7 attendees with us here tonight. So I'll just open it up now if you all want to use the hand raise to let us know that you want to verbalize any questions or comments, or send it to us through Q&A. We're all ears. Or did Aaron just do that fantastic of a job that he answered all your questions as we went through the presentation?
And what I will say is, if there aren't questions tonight, I know it's a lot to take in. As you have questions, feel free to email them to Julia, and we'll post an FAQ document on the city's website, or we might just be able to answer right through email. So this is not a process that stops tonight. It is one that's going to be ongoing, and happy to answer questions as they come up.
That's a great point, Aaron. This is just the start of the process here. Oh, I saw one hand come and go. Looks like we might have gotten a question here through Q&A. I'll go ahead and verbalize this question from Roel. Excuse me if I'm mispronouncing your name. But Roel asks, what's an example of how you translate these preferences into actual objective standards? So more the kind of how these are translated and understood.
Sure. So I'll give one example. So we got a lot of comments, especially with the larger buildings, that the buildings just look too monotonous. Like it was a boring overall architecture, that they needed to be broken up. What I've seen done in some cities is, for example, let's say you have storefronts on the bottom of a mixed use building, that the storefronts cannot be more than a certain width, so that you have broken up where you have smaller storefronts, or at least broken up in a way so you don't have one large storefront, maybe with tinted windows that you can't see in. So that's one example, that you need a certain amount of visibility. There could be other ones that you need, I think in the Parkside Precise Plan, that a building above a certain height needs to be stepped back. That way you don't have a boxy look overall on the upper stories. So we, as part of this, we also have an architect on board that's going to help us think through some of these design features and actually provide illustrations within the code. So it all depends on what the expectation is, how we actually write it. I mean, it could be as simple as, if you have a building that's 50 feet in width, you need to put at least one component. You have to put a bench outside and a bike rack outside on the sidewalk if there's enough width there, and that will give some pedestrians a better pedestrian experience. So I think as we start to define what we want to see, we'll be able to write down our expectations within the code.
Great, thank you, Aaron, and thank you for that great question. We have another question from Dwight James. Where are these large buildings going to be? The location question.
Sure, I'd actually turn this one over to Julia if you want to take this as
Sure.
senior planner.
So right now, multifamily development, so whether it's attached rental apartments or condominium buildings, are only allowed in a few zones in the city. Those zones are primarily, it's the SCR01 district, which requires a use permit currently actually for those developments. And then our R3 residential district, which runs along San Bruno Avenue. And some of the R2 district allows for kind of smaller fourplexes, depending on how the lot is sized. So there's only a few districts in town that allows multifamily development. And I do want to note that right now in our no district that allows multifamily development allows building heights over 35 feet. And in fact, in the central Brisbane area, so along San Bruno Ave and the R3, as well as the mixed use district, the NCR02, which is our Visitation Avenue Main Street, those height limits are between 28 to 30 feet. You can go up to 35 feet on Visitation Ave through approval by the commission in their design permit review. So right now we don't allow buildings that exceed that height. Those standards will be obviously part of our review and discussion as part of this process. And if you had questions, that some of the visuals that we showed in the presentation are actual representation or renderings of projects that received approval from the city's planning commission. One is a 16-unit senior housing development at 36 to 50 San Bruno. And the other is a 2-unit mixed-use building at 18 Visitation. So those have actually received planning approvals, and we're awaiting building permits for those.
Great. Thank you so much for the question, Dwight, and thank you for that answer, Julia. We did have a question, and Carolyn, I might ask you to verbalize this just to make sure we understand it, but I believe you're asking if there's other ways to better advertise things like this survey, maybe through Nextdoor. You mentioned that you were not able to access it, or you weren't on the city blog and weren't able to, you didn't see the survey, and you're asking for other ways of outreach like Nextdoor. I believe that's your question, and I definitely encourage you, if you'd like to verbalize that, if you want to raise your hand, we can call on you. But Julia, do you want to maybe respond to that initially?
Sure. So we advertise the survey a couple different ways. We'll always use the Star, which is our monthly newsletter, to publicize any surveys that we do. We did post in, I think, December, January, and February in our Star, the link to the survey. We also post on all our social media channels, which includes Facebook, Instagram, and Nextdoor. Of course, our city website and the project webpage, which is brisbaneca.org/SB2. You can always find current project information there. And we also send out in the weekly city manager news blasts links to surveys as well. So we try to get it out to folks in a lot of different ways. Because of COVID, for example, we typically sometimes will do paper versions of digital surveys. This time around, we did not, just because we don't have staff at City Hall to really process paper surveys. As COVID evolves, and if we do follow-up surveys, I hope that we will be able to make more options available other than just the digital version.
Great, thanks so much, Julia. Great question, Carolyn. And just in case maybe I'm not understanding the question, I also just want to reiterate what Aaron mentioned, that there's still an opportunity over the next 2 weeks to send in any comments or responses or anything even relevant to the survey that you wanted to make sure you have an opportunity to contribute. Definitely feel free to do that. And you see that up on the screen now with Julia's email address. So there's still definitely an opportunity to provide input directly that way as well, if that hopefully answers your question. So thank you so much for that.
And if you'd like to receive a blank copy of the survey at least, and I'm always happy to email it to you directly. So just get in touch.
Great, thank you, Julia. I don't see any other hands raised or anything else coming in through the Q&A. So unless there's any, oh, there we go. Robert, I saw your hand raised for a second. Robert, I'm going to let you unmute yourself if you'd like to. Robert, you should be able to unmute yourself if you'd like to.
Couple of questions.
Sure.
So I live up at Altamar, and to me, one of the big design flaws up here is the fact that the parking structures are separate buildings. They're separate constructions. They're not under the buildings, which to me means there's land that could be in potential open parkland is consumed by these parking structures. Now, is there any thought of, in the design plans, putting in a preference for parking to be under the buildings?
So
multi-unit building.
Aaron, did you want to take that first?
Yeah, sure. And Julia, you could add on. I think that's a design feature we could look into. I think that the tricky part you always have to balance is, and this is not only in Brisbane, but other cities, sometimes when you live in hilly areas, if you do put them in there, it requires more excavation of the land, which causes other issues. But certainly trying to have more open space and having parking hidden from view in a lot of circumstances is a design feature people could look into.
And are these designs going to apply to the Baylands? That's the other question.
Well, the Baylands will have its own specific plan, and that'll have its own ability to provide objective design standards. But I think a lot of what the community comes up with here, good design principles are good design principles. And so the idea, if there are elements that come out of this program that are worthwhile, and again, the scale will be a little different in the Baylands. I think some of the larger products that Aaron referenced are more likely to occur on the Baylands. So certainly we'll look at these, what comes out of this effort. The same outcome, we need to have objective design standards for the Baylands as well. So yeah, we intend to carry this work forward into that specific plan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And thank you all for the great answers. So let's see, it looks like maybe one person. Oh, they just joined us and jumped back off. So any other thoughts or comments or questions that you all have? Thank you so much again for spending the evening with us and for the great input thus far. I don't see anyone else popping up. Kavitha, if we want to jump to the last slide. I know I sound like a broken record, but here is all the great opportunities you have to continue to provide input again through April 20th. Feel free to email Julia at jayres@brisbaneca.org. Also, please do stay tuned to the project website, where all the great information and resources are posted, including the recording from tonight's meeting will be there as well, and the slide deck, so that you can review those and provide any other input. And that's at brisbaneca.org/SB2. And then you could also, on the website as well, subscribe for the ongoing newsletter and any other email updates that might be available. So great place to go for all things odds, to get your input heard and to share any information you might have. So with that, team, unless there's anything else that we have to share, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap and let you all go enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.